I'm Colonel Douglas Macgregor, CEO of Our Country, Our Choice, and we're talking today to Matt McCall, who is a leader in the Greater Idaho movement. Now, I know that some of our members are probably aware of this, but many are not. And I'm not sure very many Americans understand it, which is one of the reasons we wanted to bring Matt on. But this is an effort by people living in Eastern Oregon to join Idaho, effectively seceding, if you will, from Oregon and becoming part of Idaho. And I think you'll find the reasons for this of great interest, because increasingly, as each day passes, we see a lot of evidence that there is, in fact, a growing divide between what is traditionally urban and what is traditionally rural in the United States. So with that, Matt, welcome. Happy to have you. And I'll let you fill in the blanks. Tell everybody what this is about.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having us on and giving us an opportunity to come on and tell people about what we're doing, because we believe what we're doing is very important. And we believe that it's a solution to this longstanding problem. So you mentioned there's been this urban-rural divide for a very long time in our country. I've grown up in Oregon. I was born and raised here and lived my whole life here. I've lived on the east side of the state, which is very rural. I lived in the Portland metro area, which is very urban and very left-leaning. And there's been a divide in the state of Oregon, much like there is in urban rural areas across the United States for a long time. But that divide is growing, and that divide is getting more intolerable to the other side to be able to live under those rules. And so in Oregon, we have a situation where Oregon is about 4 million people, and about 2 million of those people live in the Portland metro area. And the Portland metro area is very left-leaning. I'm sure your viewers are familiar with Portland. You see it on the news. Just about every left-leaning policy that anybody's ever dreamed of implementing gets implemented in Portland. And because that metro area is so big, and it votes overwhelmingly Democratic, it controls statewide policy that gets forced onto the entire state of Oregon. So out here in Eastern Oregon, Oregon's divided by the Cascade Mountain Range. And it's two completely different geographies. It's two completely different climates, and it's two completely different cultures. So out here on the east side of the state, we're high desert, very rural, agricultural. People are very conservative. They vote very Republican and very conservatively. The people of Eastern Oregon are much more like the people of Idaho in almost every way. And so in the state of Oregon, because the metro area has so many people and it controls statewide politics, people in Eastern Oregon have been political minorities trapped in their own state for as long as I've been alive. So our movement
if I could interrupt, Matt.
Yeah.
You're kind of an interesting person, because you're a small business owner and you're in the business of producing mathematics textbooks for middle school.
Yeah, my wife and I.
Is that one of the things that gave you a particular vantage point from which to watch things in both parts of the state, education being an example?
Well, education is definitely one of those front burner issues and so my wife and I were public school teachers in the Portland metro area, and education, like I said, it's kind of the starting ground for a lot of these ideas, and they get pushed into the education system and pushed out into our communities. And it's things that a lot of people don't want in their communities. And so this divide, this cultural divide is growing. And so in Eastern Oregon, people vote overwhelmingly conservative, and they don't want almost any of the policy ideas that come from the west side of the state. So on just about every issue you can think of, minimum wage, gun control, abortion, transgenderism, immigration, you name it, the people in Eastern Oregon vote the way the people of Idaho do and want the policy of the state of Idaho, whereas the people in Western Oregon, who are very left-leaning, want a different kind of policy. And so it creates all this conflict, it creates all this tension. And so our group came along about 4 years ago, and they said, what if we took this invisible line, which is the border between Oregon and Idaho, which was placed there about 170 years ago. What if we took that imaginary line and we moved it 200 miles west to where the actual geographic divide in our state is, which is the Cascade Mountain Range, and it's the cultural divide as well. What if we moved that so that the people of Eastern Oregon could get their governance from the state of Idaho, which much better matches their values, much better matches the policy that we want for our communities out here, and let Oregon still stay Oregon, but have a smaller footprint and only have the people that are voting for those policies get those policies. So we had that idea. We thought it was a solution that made sense, a peaceful political tool to lessen political conflict and polarization and tension. And we've been going county by county in Eastern Oregon, asking voters if they think this is a good idea. And we're 13 for 13 in Eastern Oregon. The people of Eastern Oregon are saying, we want our elected leaders to pursue this solution.
Well, Matt, tell me something. There have got to be some economic or financial implications to all of this. And what would the objections, or what are the objections from the people in Portland? I mean, if the people of Portland are, comfortable with the sexualization of children in schools and public displays of various forms of transgenderism or gender bending, wouldn't they be happy to be rid of you?
Well, you would think so, but unfortunately, what we actually hear, a lot of the opposition to us is the folks that are very passionate about abortion or trans affirming care or those sorts of things. They believe that they need to keep us in the state because they think the policies of Idaho are harming people and don't protect people's rights. And so they see it as they have to be the protectors of these people out here in Eastern Oregon. But the people in Eastern Oregon don't share those values and they don't want those values in their community. So that is one of the big objections. You mentioned economics. There are economic implications, but it actually is a positive for both states because independent economic analysis was done by a group in Moscow, Idaho. And what they found is that because Oregon is a wealthier state than Idaho, and because Eastern Oregon is not as wealthy as Western Oregon, Eastern Oregon is very similar to Idaho. It's similar geographically, economically, culturally, tax-wise. So you can take those Eastern Oregon counties, you could add them to Idaho, and it would be a plus for Idaho's economy. It would be a plus for their tax revenue, but it would also be a plus for Western Oregon because currently Western Oregon has to send tax dollars to Eastern Oregon. They would get to keep those tax dollars at home, spend them on problems specific to Western Oregonians. So it's a win-win for both Oregon and Idaho, and especially for Eastern Oregonians. That same economic analysis found that getting those Eastern Oregon counties into Idaho's lower tax burden, lower regulation environment would cause those economies to surge. So we've taken a lot of time and put a lot of effort into trying to craft a political solution that creates wins for everybody involved, that everybody can say, yes, that makes sense, and we want to do that.
Well, that certainly makes sense to me, but you've got a problem because the people that are in Western Oregon obviously feel that they have a sacred duty to compel you to adopt their values, their attitudes, their way of doing business. Am I correct?
You are correct. And that is our stumbling block. So to move a state line, you just need the two state legislatures of any bordering states to agree, and then it gets signed off by Congress. We've been to Idaho, the Idaho legislature, the Idaho House passed a memorial saying we are ready to have this conversation with the state of Oregon. We had the same memorial that was introduced in Oregon, and it got stonewalled by the Democratic leadership there. So our movement, which is a grassroots populist movement that the people of Eastern Oregon are saying they want to be part of Idaho, they want to move this border, we're getting stopped right now by elected leaders on the west side of the state who are refusing to have the conversation.
Yeah, well, I understand that completely, but what I think is very important to point out is that none of your supporters or your constituents, whatever you want to call them, in the greater Idaho movement that are living in Eastern Oregon, none of them are interested in imposing their views, their values, their opinions on the people that are in Western Oregon, correct?
Correct. That's exactly right. What our movement is all about is self-determination, and it's all about matching up people to the government they actually want, that they vote for, and that matches their values. And if we can do that, if we can get people better matched up to governance that they want, we can lower political tension, political conflict. We're not trying to force Portland. People out here in Eastern Oregon, we live hundreds of miles away from the Portland metro area, and we see it on the news like everybody else, and we think it's, that's Portland. We're not trying to force Portland to be any different, but we don't want that for our communities. We don't want those policies in our communities. Let us go. Let Portland have the kind of policies the people of Portland want, but let the rest of us get policies that make sense for us.
Well, it strikes me, Matt, that you're essentially addressing a problem that is by no means unique to Oregon. I mean, I live in Virginia, and once you reach the edge of the Blue Ridge and you go west, many of the people in the western part of Virginia would like to secede from Virginia as it is now and join West Virginia for
Yeah.
many of the same reasons that you're outlining.
Absolutely. It's become a big city versus the rest of America sort of situation in the United States, where you have these big cities that are overwhelmingly left-leaning and Democrat controlled and implement the most left-leaning policy, that you can. And then you have the rest of your state. And you said it, it's not unique to Oregon. The state of Washington is just like we are, divided by the Cascade Mountain Range. You have the west side of the state, Seattle, King County rules the state, but you get out in Eastern Washington, it's farmers and ranchers and conservative traditional people that don't want any of that policy. This is a tool that we could use all across the United States, again, to lower political conflict, lower political tension.
Well, I think you're probably right. On the other hand, you've got another sort of 800-pound gorilla sitting in the corner, and that's demographics. That the people that live in Oregon don't just have different values. In many cases, they may be very different people from you. Certainly that's true here in Northern Virginia, where once you reach the Blue Ridge and go west, you're dealing with a very different population demographically in terms of its composition, its background, its culture, its ethnicity from the people that are dominant in Northern Virginia. Is that also the case where you are or not?
Well, I think anytime you get into, Oregon is not a real diverse state, period. It's very kind of, white and there's not a lot of minorities in the whole entire state of Oregon, and Idaho's similar. But what you get is not a racial diversity, but what you get is just this cultural diversity. Eastern Oregon has very conservative, traditional values, much like the people of Idaho. You get onto the west side of Oregon, and even the conservative people in Western Oregon aren't as conservative as the people in Eastern Oregon. And then you get into the Willamette Valley in the metro area, and you just have it's a completely different culture, and it's a completely different value set, worldview. So, in that sense, we do. It's two very different peoples forced to tug of war over state government. And there's a better solution to that. And that is, let's just get those people in Eastern Oregon into governance that they actually want, that makes sense for them.
No, I understand. And I'm not really surprised. And I think your points are well taken. And I wish you success. The only thing that concerns me a little bit is that over time as a nation, we end up with the seaboard in the east and the west along the coast that is almost completely divorced from the rest of the country.
Well, one of the things that we say, Colonel, is that Greater Idaho did not cause this, partisan divide. We didn't cause this geographic divide. People are already divided geographically. If you go to Oregon, Washington, California, like you said, along the coast, it's very, very left leaning and very, very liberal. And that's already happened. Because of the system we have in place, it just allows those people on that very narrow strip of geography to control and implement policy onto people that don't want it and don't want those policies. We could do better. We can create policy that allows the diversity of people in our country to get government that makes sense for them without the back and forth, tug of war. When I get in power, I'm going to force this on you, and then vice versa. That's not working. There's a better solution.
No, absolutely. And the nation itself, when it was founded, was really founded along the lines that you're describing. That's one of the reasons we ended up with the Electoral College, because there was a recognition that the majority of the population that lived out in the countryside did not want to be ruled by a minority in the city. They wanted to be able to rule themselves, make their own laws, decide their own future. So you've really raised important points. You've educated me, and I'm sure our members will appreciate what you've had to say. So, Matt, thanks very much for coming on, and we wish you all the best in your work together with Idaho to make this happen.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to come on. If people want to learn more about what we're doing, they can go to greateridaho.org and follow what we're doing there. Thank you.
And good luck with those math textbooks. I hope you can make some sense out of it and make kids like it, because I never did.
Well, I appreciate it. We'll do our best.
Okay, Matt. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.